7 black maids were left hanging to death until a Hell's Angel leader showed up and... It starts with 7 innocent black maids, tied to a tree, moments from death, when out of nowhere, a feared biker gang roars in like thunder. Their leader, silent, dangerous, impossible to predict, cuts them down and claims them as his own to protect. But saving them was only the beginning, because someone powerful wants these women gone for good. As they flee down dark back roads, a little boy reveals a secret that shakes everything. A secret about his mother and the rich man chasing them. And hidden inside the women's clothes is a ledger, one that could expose a whole web of lies, corruption, and murder. Now killers, crooked cops, and even traitors in the bikers' own crew are hunting them across state lines. If this outlaw is the only shield they have left, can he save them before the truth gets them all killed? Drop a comment below and share which part of the world you're tuning in from today. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. The scorching Georgia sun beat down mercilessly as 7 women stood trembling atop rickety wooden crates beneath the sprawling branches of an ancient oak tree. Nooses hung heavy around their necks, the rough rope chafing against their skin. Eloria Bennett's heart pounded so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. Next to her, Ruthie Carter's eyes were squeezed shut, her lips moving in silent prayer. The afternoon air was thick with hatred and the sour stench of fear. The lynch mob surrounding them, about 30 men with faces twisted in anger, grew more restless with each passing minute. Their accusations about poisoning the senator's widow rang out between cruel jeers and taunts. Mabel Johnson, usually quick with a joke even in tough times, stood perfectly still, tears streaming down her face. On her left, Clarice Green whispered scripture under her breath, her quiet voice carrying words of comfort to the others. "Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death." Janie Morris's small frame shook with silent sobs, while Tasha Bryant hummed a hymn so softly it was almost inaudible. Lila Henderson, always the practical one, kept her eyes fixed straight ahead, as if refusing to acknowledge the horror of their situation might somehow make it less real. The sun dipped lower on the horizon, casting long shadows across the dusty ground. The mob's chanting grew louder, more insistent. "String 'em up! String 'em up!" The words crashed against the women like physical blows. Eloria felt the crate beneath her feet shift slightly. Her heart jumped into her throat as she realized what was coming. She caught Ruthie's eye, saw the same terrified understanding there. They were out of time. "On 3!" someone shouted from the crowd. The women instinctively reached for each other's hands, though their wrists were bound tight behind their backs. "1!" Tasha's humming grew louder, her voice cracking with emotion. 2! Clarice's prayers rose above the hateful chorus. "The Lord is my shepherd." But before 3 could ring out, another sound cut through the humid air, a deep, thunderous roar that seemed to shake the very ground. The mob's chanting faltered as the rumble grew louder, closer, until it was unmistakable. Motorcycles, dozens of them. Like an avenging army, the bikers appeared through the dust, their machines snarling like angry beasts. At their head rode a man whose very presence commanded attention. Kane Ghost Maddox brought his motorcycle to a sliding stop, kicking up a cloud of red Georgia clay that scattered the closest members of the mob. He was an imposing figure, tall and broad-shouldered, with hard eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. His leather vest bore the distinctive patches of the Hell's Angels, and the way he carried himself made it clear he was their leader. Behind him, his gang spread out in a protective line, their bikes forming a barrier between the mob and the women. Ghost dismounted in one fluid motion, his boots hitting the ground with purpose. Without a word, he strode toward the oak tree, pulling out a wicked-looking knife. The mob shifted uneasily, but something in his bearing, the controlled violence in every movement, kept them from interfering. He reached Eloria first. The knife flashed upward, and suddenly she was falling. But instead of dropping to her death, she felt strong arms catch her. Ghost lowered her gently to the ground before moving on to the next woman. One by one, he cut them free, his gang members moving in to catch each woman as the ropes were severed. Finally, Ghost turned to face the mob. His voice, when he spoke, was quiet but carried an unmistakable threat. "Back! Away!" Just 2 words, but they held enough menace to make even the most aggressive members of the lynch mob take a step backward. The women huddled together, supporting each other as circulation returned painfully to their hands and feet. Eloria swayed, lightheaded from fear and the tight rope that had been around her neck. Ghost noticed immediately and was at her side in 2 long strides. The mob began to disperse, melting away into the gathering darkness like shadows. They went quietly, but with muttered threats and backward glances that promised this wasn't over. Ghost's gang maintained their protective formation, engines idling with barely contained power. "You're hurt," Ghost said to Eloria, his voice surprisingly gentle for such an intimidating man. Without waiting for a response, he lifted her carefully onto his bike. "We need to get you all somewhere safe. My place isn't far. We can tend to your injuries there." The other women were helped onto bikes behind various gang members. Ruthie hesitated for just a moment before climbing on, but one look at the angry marks on her wrists convinced her they needed help, wherever it came from. As the group roared off into the night, their headlights cut bright paths through the darkness. Eloria, still barely conscious, held on to Ghost's solid frame as they sped through back roads she didn't recognize. Behind them, the rest of the women and their unlikely saviors followed in formation, leaving the horror of the lynch mob behind. The warm night air whipped past them, carrying away the last echoes of hatred and replacing them with the promise of sanctuary. Even in her dazed state, Eloria couldn't help but marvel at how God's help had arrived in such an unexpected form. Not as angels with wings, but angels on motorcycles, leather-clad saviors who had appeared just when all hope seemed lost. The convoy of bikes wound its way deeper into the Georgia night, heading for Ghost's safe house, where they could regroup and recover. The women's ordeal wasn't over, but they had survived what should have been their last moments on Earth. As they rode through the darkness, the steady rumble of motorcycles replaced the mob's chants, a symphony of salvation none of them would ever forget. The converted barn sat deep in the Georgia woods, hidden behind thick stands of pine and sweet gum trees. Inside, the space was Spartanly furnished but clean, with cinder-block walls and a high ceiling crossed by wooden beams. 7 cots had been hastily arranged along one wall, and now held the exhausted forms of the women who had so narrowly escaped death. Ghost's bikers moved quietly through the space, bringing water and blankets. Their normally rough demeanor had softened in the presence of such obvious suffering. One particularly burly man, with a gray-streaked beard, gently helped Mabel sit up to drink, while another tucked an extra blanket around Tasha's shoulders. The purple-black bruises forming on the women's necks stood out starkly against their skin, a violent reminder of what had almost happened. Ghost stood near the door, his massive frame casting a long shadow in the lamplight. His face was set in hard lines as he watched his men tend to the women, but his eyes held a storm of emotions. Finally, he approached Eloria's cot. She had been the strongest of the group during their escape, but now lay pale and quiet, one hand absently touching the marks on her throat. Ghost pulled up a wooden chair and sat beside her. "I need to know," he said, keeping his voice low and controlled. "Why did they want you dead? All of you?" Eloria's eyes darted to her fellow maids before she tried to speak. The words came out as a painful whisper. "Water. Please." One of the bikers immediately brought over a glass, and Ghost helped her take small sips. When she could speak again, her voice was barely above a whisper, but clear enough to understand. "The ledger," she said. "I took it from Mrs. Harrington's study, right after—" She paused, swallowing carefully. "Right after she died. But it wasn't us who poisoned her. We loved that woman. She was kind to us." Ghost leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "What ledger?" Eloria's trembling hands went to her apron, which had somehow stayed with her through everything. With careful movements, she worked at the hem, revealing a hidden pocket in the lining. From it, she withdrew a small black book. "This is why they wanted us dead," she said, passing it to Ghost. "They knew someone had taken it, but they didn't know which one of us. So they decided to kill us all." Ghost opened the ledger, his expression growing darker as he read. Page after page detailed bribes, payoffs, and corrupt dealings. Names, dates, amounts, all meticulously recorded. Sheriff Briggs appeared repeatedly, along with several prominent politicians and businessmen. "Mrs. Harrington kept track of everything her husband was involved in," Eloria explained. "The senator might be dead, but his network is still operating. When she threatened to expose them—" Her voice trailed off. "They killed her," Ghost finished, still scanning the pages. "And tried to pin it on you." Clarice spoke up from her cot, her voice stronger now. "We were all working that day. They knew it would be easy to blame us. Who would question it if 7 black maids were accused of murder?" Ghost closed the ledger with a sharp snap. "This is enough to bring down half the county government." "That's why they couldn't let us live," Ruthie added. "Even if we didn't have the ledger, we knew too much. We'd heard things over the years, seen things." Dawn was beginning to paint the high windows with pale light when several of Ghost's men emerged from the small kitchen area carrying plates of eggs, bacon, and toast. The simple breakfast had been prepared with obvious care, and the aroma filled the barn with a sense of normalcy that seemed almost surreal after the night's events. Ghost made sure each woman had food and fresh water before addressing them as a group. "First light is coming. We need to move you across state lines before Briggs can organize a proper manhunt. The ledger is proof of everything, but it's also a death sentence if they catch you with it." He watched as the women ate, some with trembling hands, others with the desperate hunger of those who thought they'd never eat again. His men hovered nearby, ready to help if needed, their usual tough demeanor transformed by an unexpected protective instinct. Standing by the wall, Ghost stared at the rough cinder block surface, his mind racing through scenarios and consequences. Taking on the sheriff meant declaring war on the whole corrupt system. His club would become targets. Safe houses like this one would be compromised. Everything he'd built over the years would be at risk. But as he turned back to look at the women, at their bruised necks and haunted eyes, at their dignity even in the face of such horror, he knew there was no other choice. Walking away would be worse than anything the sheriff could do to him. Some lines couldn't be uncrossed, some burdens couldn't be set down, once picked up. The morning light strengthened, filtering through the trees outside to cast dappled shadows on the barn's floor. Ghost watched them shift and move, like nature itself was restless with the weight of what was to come. The morning sun climbed higher as Ghost directed his men to prepare for departure. 2 weathered pickup trucks stood ready, their beds lined with blankets and supplies. The women, still moving carefully from their ordeal, helped each other climb in while Ghost's bikers mounted their motorcycles. "We'll take the old county roads," Ghost explained, his voice low and steady. "Less traffic, more escape routes if we need them. The guys will ride ahead to scout." He gestured to the trucks. Mabel, Clarice, and Janie in the first truck. Ruthie, Eloria, Tasha, and Lila in the second. Keep your heads down when we pass through towns. The convoy set out with 4 bikers in front, the trucks in the middle, and 3 more bikers bringing up the rear. Ghost drove the second truck himself, constantly checking his mirrors. The morning heat built quickly, turning the cab into an oven despite the windows being rolled down. They wound their way through back roads, passing abandoned barns and overgrown fields. Ghost had a contact at an Atlanta newspaper, someone who'd helped expose corruption before and knew how to protect sources. If they could just make it to the city. The radio crackled. "Boss, we got a problem up ahead." Ghost's hands tightened on the steering wheel as he rounded a bend. A black SUV blocked the narrow road, parked sideways across both lanes. A man in an expensive suit stood beside it, his posture tense but controlled. Ghost brought the truck to a stop, sizing up the situation. The man was Cole Harrington. He recognized him from news coverage of his business deals. The senator's son, who'd inherited his mother's fortune just days ago. "Stay in the truck," Ghost ordered, stepping out. Behind him, he heard the rumble of motorcycles as his men took up defensive positions. Cole Harrington raised his hand slightly. "I'm not here to cause trouble," he called out. "I want to help get these women to proper authorities who can protect them." "The same authorities who tried to lynch them last night?" Ghost's voice carried dangerous undertones. Before Cole could respond, movement caught Ghost's eye. The SUV's back door opened, and a small boy, no more than 6 years old, scrambled out. "Isaiah!" Cole's shout held genuine panic. "Get back in the car!" But the boy was already running toward the second truck, his sneakers kicking up dust. "Mommy!" he cried out. Ruthie's gasp was audible as she practically fell out of the truck's bed, rushing to meet her son. She scooped him up, holding him tight as tears streamed down her face. "I missed you so much," Isaiah whispered, but in the tense silence, everyone heard his next words clearly. "Mommy says you're my daddy." The boy pointed at Cole Harrington, whose face, drained of all color. The revelation hit like a thunderclap. Ghost's men exchanged glances while the other maids stared in shock. Ruthie's shoulders shook with sobs as she clutched Isaiah tighter. Cole took an unsteady step forward. "Ruthie, this isn't—" He swallowed hard. "The poisoning accusation, it's all a misunderstanding. I know you women didn't hurt my mother. I can help fix this." Ghost studied the man's face, reading the guilt and fear there. But something else caught his attention. Movement in the trees beyond the SUV. His instincts screamed danger. "Everyone back in the trucks. Now!" Ghost's command cut through the emotional tension. "Cole, you've got about 2 minutes to decide if you're coming with us or not, but we're leaving." "I can't just—" Cole started. "Daddy, please!" Isaiah reached toward him, still in Ruthie's arms. "I'm scared." Cole's face crumpled, but Ghost was already moving. He helped Ruthie and Isaiah into the truck's cab, noticing the teddy bear clutched in the boy's small hands. His men were already turning their bikes around, heading for an alternate route Ghost had memorized. "Your choice, Cole," Ghost called out, climbing into the driver's seat. "But make it fast." Through the rearview mirror, Ghost watched Cole Harrington standing alone in the road as they pulled away, the man's figure growing smaller until they turned onto a narrow dirt track between the pine trees. Isaiah sat between Ghost and Ruthie in the cab, his teddy bear hugged tight to his chest. His small shoulders trembled. Ghost glanced down at the boy, then pulled over to the side of the road. The rest of the convoy stopped too, waiting. "Hey, little man," Ghost said softly, turning to face Isaiah. "You're being really brave, you know that?" Isaiah looked up at him with wide, tear-filled eyes. "Are the bad people coming?" "Nobody's gonna hurt you," Ghost promised. You see all those motorcycles out there? Those are my friends. They're helping protect you and your mom and all the other ladies." "Like superheroes?" Isaiah whispered. Ghost managed a small smile. "Something like that. And you know what? Your mom is really brave too. She's been protecting you this whole time." Ruthie reached over and squeezed her son's hand. "That's right, baby. And Mr. Ghost here, he's helping us get somewhere safe." Isaiah studied Ghost's face for a long moment, then held out his teddy bear. "Mr. Bear says thank you." Ghost gently touched the teddy bear's paw. "Tell Mr. Bear he's welcome. Now, how about we find some lunch soon? I bet you're hungry." The boy nodded, some of the fear leaving his face. Ghost put the truck back in gear, leading his convoy deeper into the Georgia countryside as the sun began its slow descent toward evening. In the passenger seat, Ruthie wiped away tears while Isaiah leaned against her, his eyes growing heavy despite his efforts to stay awake. The teddy bear sat in his lap, its glass eyes reflecting the golden afternoon light that filtered through the trees. Ghost kept one hand on the wheel and one eye on his mirrors, watching for any sign of pursuit while the convoy pressed on toward Atlanta and whatever safety they might find there. The setting sun painted long shadows through the pine trees as Ghost's convoy pulled off the highway. The air was thick with late summer heat, making the asphalt shimmer in the dying light. Ghost raised his hand, signaling the group to stop in a wide gravel turnout bordered by dense forest. "We'll regroup here," he called out, his voice carrying across the quiet stretch of road. "Check our bearings before—" The sharp crack of a rifle split the air. Metal screamed as a bullet punched through the truck's tailgate, mere inches from where Eloria sat. Time seemed to freeze for a heartbeat, then erupted into chaos. "Down! Everyone down!" Ghost roared, already moving. "Behind the ravine!" The second shot came as the women scrambled from the trucks, the bullet splintering bark from a nearby pine tree. Ghost's bikers moved with practiced precision, engines roaring to life as they spread out for cover. Eloria stumbled, and Ghost caught her arm, practically carrying her behind the natural shelter of the ravine wall. "Stay low," he ordered, pressing her down next to the other maids. Ruthie clutched Isaiah to her chest, covering his ears as he whimpered. The boy's teddy bear lay forgotten in the truck. Ghost's eyes scanned the tree line, catching movement on a ridge about 300 yards away. "Marcus, Joey," he called to two of his most experienced riders. "With me, 3 o'clock, high ground." The three men moved like shadows through the underbrush, using the growing darkness to their advantage. Ghost's boots made no sound on the pine needles as he circled wide, coming at the sniper's position from the side. He could hear the faint whine of an engine, not a motorcycle, something smaller. Another shot cracked through the trees, but the sniper was shooting blind now, unable to see his targets behind the ravine. Ghost caught a glimpse of tactical gear, a professional setup. This was no angry local. This was a hired killer. The sniper must have sensed them closing in. There was a sudden burst of movement, and an ATV roared to life, its engine echoing through the forest. Ghost and his men gave chase, but the smaller vehicle had the advantage in the dense woods, weaving between trees until its taillights disappeared into the gathering dark. Ghost jogged back to the ravine, his breath coming hard. Sweat soaked his shirt despite the cooling evening air. The women huddled together, their faces pale in the twilight. Isaiah had stopped crying, but his small hands gripped his mother's shirt so tight his knuckles were white. "Everyone okay?" Ghost asked, scanning the group. They nodded, though he could see them trembling. "That wasn't random," Eloria said softly, one hand rubbing her throat where rope burns were still visible. "They were aiming for me." Ghost nodded grimly. "Professional hit. They must know you have the ledger." He turned to his gang. We need to move deeper into the woods. No fires tonight." They drove the vehicles off-road, following a barely visible logging track until they found a small clearing surrounded by thick pines. The moon rose, casting silver light through the branches as they made camp. Ghost posted guards in a wide perimeter, their motorcycles hidden under camouflage tarps. The women gathered in a tight circle, speaking in whispers. Isaiah had finally fallen asleep in Ruthie's lap, his face peaceful despite the terror of the day. Ghost could hear fragments of prayers mixing with fearful murmurs. "Lord, protect us on this journey. What if they find us again? Should have never taken that ledger." Ghost walked to the edge of their circle and crouched down. His voice was low but firm. "I need you all to understand something. These men, the ones who want that ledger, they're powerful. They've got money, influence, and now they're hiring killers. Running won't be enough." Eloria met his gaze steadily. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying our only chance is to get that ledger somewhere it can do real damage. I know a journalist in Tennessee. She's tough, honest, and she's got connections to protect her sources. If we can get the ledger to her, she can publish everything. Make it too big to cover up." "How far is Tennessee?" Mabel asked, wringing her hands. "About 200 miles, give or take. We'll have to stay off main roads, move careful." Ghost looked at each woman in turn. "I won't lie, it's going to be dangerous. But I promise you this. I will get you there, or die trying." The women exchanged glances, their faces showing a mix of fear and determination. Finally, Ruthie spoke, her hand stroking Isaiah's hair. "We trust you, Ghost. God help us, but we do." Ghost nodded once, then stood. The night had deepened, stars appearing between the pine branches. He drew his knife, a wicked-looking blade that caught the moonlight, and began walking the perimeter. His footsteps were silent on the forest floor as he moved from shadow to shadow, every sense alert for danger. As midnight approached, Ghost completed another circuit of the camp. The women had finally fallen into uneasy sleep, huddled together for warmth and comfort. His men maintained their watch positions, professional and alert. The knife in Ghost's hand felt like a promise as he gazed into the darkness beyond their clearing. He had saved these women once, at the lynching tree. Now he would save them again, no matter the cost. The moon climbed higher, casting silver shadows through the pines. Ghost continued his vigil, a silent guardian in the Georgia night, while somewhere in the darkness, their hunters planned their next move. The first hints of sunrise filtered through the pine branches, painting the sky in soft pinks and purples. Ghost moved quietly through the makeshift camp, gently waking each person. He pulled protein bars and water bottles from his saddlebags, along with a collection of leather jackets borrowed from his men. "Here," he said softly, draping a jacket over Clarice's shoulders. "Morning's still got bite." A heart-wrenching cry pierced the dawn quiet. Isaiah thrashed in his sleep, tears streaming down his face as nightmares gripped him. Ruthie tried to comfort him, but the boy remained caught in his terror. To everyone's surprise, including his own, Ghost knelt beside the crying child. "Hey, little man," he said, his gravelly voice gentled to nearly a whisper. "You're safe now. Nobody's gonna hurt you while I'm here." Isaiah's eyes fluttered open, focusing on Ghost's face. The tears slowed, then stopped. "Promise?" "Cross my heart," Ghost replied, making the gesture. A small smile tugged at Isaiah's lips. They packed quickly and quietly, loading into the trucks. Ghost's bikers took point and rear guard on their motorcycles, a protective escort through the morning mist. As they wound their way along forgotten back roads, the tension from the previous night's attack began to ease. Mabel sniffed dramatically at a thermos of coffee passed to her by one of the bikers, a burly man with a graying beard who called himself Bear. Lord have mercy. What did you do to this coffee? Strain it through your boots? Bear's belly laugh boomed across the CB radio. That's premium truck stop coffee, ma'am. Premium shoe leather, more like, Mabel shot back, but she was grinning as she took another sip. Clarice caught her reflection in the side mirror and groaned. Look at my hair. 3 days on the run, and I look like I've been through a tornado. She patted at the disheveled strands, then shrugged with a laugh. Guess I'll start a new style. Fugitive chic. From the back of the truck, Tasha's voice rose in a gentle hymn. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound. One by one, the other women joined in, their harmonies floating through the morning air. Even some of the bikers hummed along, the sacred music bringing peace to their strange caravan. By late afternoon, Ghost guided them into an abandoned gas station, its windows boarded and pumps long dry. While his men secured the perimeter, he set up a small camping stove. Soon the smell of heating soup filled the air. They sat in a circle, sharing the simple meal. The warm food and relative safety loosened tongues, and stories began to flow. Mama taught me to cook when I was 8, Mabel shared, stirring her soup. Said a woman needed to know her way around a kitchen, but what she really taught me was love, how to care for people through food. Clarice nodded. My grandmother was the same way. She'd host Sunday dinners for anyone who needed a meal, taught me that faith isn't just about church, it's about showing God's love through actions. I always wanted to be a music teacher, Tasha admitted softly. Used to practice piano at church, whenever I could. Still dream about it sometimes. Ghost listened quietly, letting their stories wash over him. When Eloria asked about his past, he stayed silent for a long moment. Done things I'm not proud of, he finally said, his voice low. Spent most of my life fighting or running. But sometimes... He glanced at Isaiah, who was falling asleep against his mother's shoulder. Sometimes you get a chance to do something right. As darkness fell, they packed up and continued north. Ghost kept them on back roads, avoiding towns and highways. The moon rose full and bright, guiding their way, until finally, well past midnight, they turned into a weathered mechanic's shop. Old friend owns this place, Ghost explained as he unlocked the door. We'll be safe here tonight. Inside, the garage was clean, despite its aged appearance. Cots had been set up between tool cabinets and workbenches, with clean blankets folded at the foot of each one. For the first time since the lynching tree, they had solid walls around them and a roof over their heads. The women settled onto the cots, exhaustion evident in every movement. Isaiah curled up next to his mother, clutching his teddy bear. The bikers took up positions outside, their low voices carrying through the night air as they established watch rotations. Clarice said a quiet prayer of thanks before lying down. God works in mysterious ways, she murmured. Who would have thought he'd send angels wearing leather? Ghost pretended not to hear as he checked the locks one final time. But in the darkness of the garage, surrounded by the soft breathing of sleeping women and children, he allowed himself a small smile. Maybe, just maybe, redemption was possible after all. The old radio in Buck's garage crackled to life early the next morning, its weak signal cutting through the quiet dawn. Ghost reached to turn it up as a news bulletin began. Breaking news in the Senator Harrington murder case. The announcer's voice was crisp and urgent. Sheriff Dalton Briggs has issued a statewide manhunt for 7 women suspected in the poisoning death of Margaret Harrington. The suspects are believed to have been kidnapped by a dangerous biker gang leader known only as Ghost. Citizens are warned these individuals should be considered armed and dangerous. Ruthie's face went pale as she clutched Isaiah to her chest, her hands trembling. "They're making us sound like monsters," she whispered, pressing her face into her son's hair. "Mama?" Isaiah's small voice quivered. "Are the bad men coming?" Ghost crossed the garage in 3 long strides, kneeling beside them. "Nobody's coming for you, kid? Not while I'm here?" He looked around at the other women, his voice firm but gentle. "We're going to clear your names. That ledger tells the real story, and soon everyone will know it." Buck, the mechanic, was a weathered man in his 60s with kind eyes and grease-stained hands. He switched off the radio with a grunt. "Bunch of hogwash," he muttered, then raised his voice. "Breakfast's ready in the office. Nothing fancy, but it's hot." The office turned out to be a small room off the main garage, with mismatched chairs and a worn Formica table. Buck had laid out a feast of scrambled eggs, bacon, and toast. The coffee, unlike Bear's brew from yesterday, actually smelled like coffee. "Been friends with Ghost going on 20 years, Buck told them as they ate. "Never known him to back the wrong horse. If he says you ladies are innocent, that's good enough for me." Outside, the morning sun climbed higher as Buck worked on 2 damaged motorcycles. The bikes had taken hits during the sniper attack, one with a bullet-punctured gas tank, the other with damaged brake lines. His skilled hands moved surely over the machines while Ghost helped, passing tools and holding parts in place. "Sheriff's got the whole state looking for you," Buck said quietly as he worked. "But I know these back roads better than any lawman. Got some routes mapped out that'll keep you off the main highways." The women spent the morning resting, washing up in Buck's small bathroom, and helping to prepare supplies for the next leg of their journey. Clarice and Mabel took turns braiding each other's hair, while Tasha taught Isaiah simple hand-clapping games to keep him occupied. Just after 2 o'clock in the afternoon, Ghost's burner phone buzzed with an encrypted message. He read it twice, then nodded to himself. "Our journalist contact is ready," he announced. "There's a church sanctuary in Tennessee where we can meet safely." He studied the faces around him. "It's about 8 hours of careful driving from here. We leave at dusk." The women packed quickly, having learned over the past few days to travel light. Buck provided them with fresh water, some sandwiches, and 2 thermal blankets for each truck. "God bless you," Eloria told Buck as they prepared to leave, her voice thick with emotion. The old mechanic just smiled and patted her shoulder. "You just stay safe, here? And you?" He turned to Ghost. "You watch over these ladies like they were your own family." They pulled out as the sun was setting, Ghost's remaining bikers flanking the trucks. The rural roads Buck had suggested wound through dense forests and past abandoned farms, far from the busy highways where police would be watching. In the back of the lead truck, the women held hands and prayed together, their voices barely above whispers. Lila led them in the Lord's Prayer, while Janie added her own petition for protection. Even Mabel, who usually deflected serious moments with humor, bowed her head solemnly. The storm clouds that had been gathering all afternoon finally opened up around 9 o'clock. The rain came down in sheets, reducing visibility to mere feet. Ghost was forced to signal a stop, guiding both trucks under a massive concrete overpass. "Can't drive in this," he said, checking his phone for weather updates. "We'll wait it out. Here." Thunder rolled overhead as Ghost and his men distributed the thermal blankets. The women huddled together for warmth, their breath visible in the cooling air. Isaiah whimpered at each lightning flash, pressing closer to Ruthie. "Hey, little man," Ghost called softly. "Want to see something cool?" He held out his arms, and after a questioning look at his mother, Isaiah went to him. Ghost settled the boy in his lap and wrapped them both in a blanket. "See that lightning?" Ghost pointed to the bright flashes illuminating the landscape. "That's just God taking pictures of his creation. And the thunder? That's his way of saying, cheese." Isaiah giggled despite his fear, snuggling deeper into Ghost's embrace. The big man's presence seemed to calm the child, and soon Isaiah's eyes began to droop. Within minutes, he was fast asleep, his small body completely relaxed in Ghost's strong arms. The storm raged on, lightning splitting the sky in brilliant displays. Ghost held Isaiah securely, watching the weather with alert eyes, while the women whispered quiet conversations around him. The rain drummed steadily on the overpass above them, a constant reminder of their pause in this desperate journey toward hope and justice. The old white clapboard church emerged from the early morning mist like a vision of hope. Its weathered steeple pointed skyward, a beacon guiding Ghost's weary convoy to sanctuary. Pastor Evelyn Brooks stood on the front steps, her silver hair gleaming in the dawn light, arms open in welcome despite the dangerous circumstances that brought them to her door. Come in quickly," she urged, ushering the exhausted group inside. Her warm brown eyes took in their disheveled appearance without judgment. "The Lord sent me a dream about visitors needing shelter. I've been up since 4 o'clock getting things ready." The church's interior smelled of fresh coffee and pine cleaner. Pastor Evelyn led the women to the basement where she had set up cots and laid out fresh towels. "There are 2 showers in the fellowship hall bathroom," she explained, "and I've gathered some clean clothes from our donation closet." Tears welled in Eloria's eyes as she took in the simple kindness. "Pastor, we don't know how to thank you." "Thank the Lord, child. I'm just his helping hands." Pastor Evelyn squeezed her shoulder. "Now, who's hungry?" The women took turns showering while Pastor Evelyn served a breakfast of scrambled eggs, toast, and fruit. Isaiah fell asleep at the table, his small body finally relaxing in the safety of the church walls. Ghost carried him to a cot and tucked a blanket around his shoulders. As the morning progressed, the church kitchen came alive with activity. The aroma of cornbread and beef stew filled the air as the women helped prepare a proper meal. Mabel took charge of the cornbread, claiming her grandmother's recipe was blessed by angels themselves. Tasha and Clarice chopped vegetables while humming Amazing Grace, their voices blending in perfect harmony. "Come on now, lift those voices up," Janie encouraged, and soon the kitchen rang with gospel music. Even Ruthie, who had been quiet since their escape began, joined in with a clear soprano that brought tears to Pastor Evelyn's eyes. Ghost watched from his post near the window, alert for any sign of threat, but moved by the scene before him. These women, who had faced death just days ago, were finding joy in simple moments of fellowship. Isaiah woke from his nap and immediately sought Ghost out, climbing into the chair next to him. "Want to help me stir the stew?" the boy asked, tugging on Ghost's leather jacket. Something softened in Ghost's expression. "Sure, kid." He lifted Isaiah up so he could reach the big pot, helping him hold the wooden spoon. The boy's face lit up with pride as he stirred carefully under Ghost's watchful guidance. Pastor Evelyn observed this interaction with knowing eyes. She approached Ghost later as he stood guard by the church entrance. "You know," she said softly, "God often works through unlikely vessels. Even Saul, who persecuted Christians, became Paul, one of the Lord's most devoted servants." Ghost shifted uncomfortably. "With all due respect, Pastor, I'm no apostle. Just trying to keep these folks alive." "And isn't that God's work?" She patted his arm. "There's a goodness in you, son, even if you refuse to see it yourself." As evening approached, they gathered around tables pushed together in the fellowship hall. The stew was served in mismatched bowls, steam rising from the rich broth. Cornbread passed from hand to hand, along with stories and laughter that seemed to push back the darkness waiting outside. Lila said grace, her voice strong and clear. "Lord, we thank you for this food, for safety, and for sending angels to watch over us, even if some of them wear leather jackets. The meal felt like a family gathering, with Isaiah moving between Ghost and his mother, sharing bits of stories about his day. The women's faces glowed in the warm light, tension easing from their shoulders for the first time in days. After dinner, Pastor Evelyn distributed sleeping bags and blankets throughout the sanctuary. The wooden pews became makeshift beds, with Isaiah insisting on placing his sleeping bag next to Ghost's position by the door. As night settled over the church, soft singing began again. Tasha started "This Little Light of Mine," and others joined in, voices rising and falling like a gentle tide. The hymns drifted through the sanctuary, wrapping around them like a comforting embrace. Ghost maintained his vigil, but even he felt the peace of this moment. Isaiah had fallen asleep holding his teddy bear, one small hand stretched out toward Ghost, as if seeking reassurance. The moonlight filtered through stained glass windows, casting colors across the sleeping forms of the women who had become so much more than just people he was protecting. Pastor Evelyn moved quietly through the sanctuary, adjusting blankets and whispering prayers. The singing continued, a soft undercurrent of faith and hope in the darkness. For this one night at least, they were safe. For this one night, they were family. Near midnight, the peaceful sanctuary fell silent except for soft breathing and Isaiah's occasional murmurs. Ghost kept watch from his position by the door, scanning the shadowy church grounds through stained glass windows. The moonlight cast colorful patterns across the sleeping forms of the maids, who had finally found rest after days of running. A faint scraping sound outside made Ghost tense. His trained ears picked up muffled footsteps approaching from multiple directions. Before he could raise the alarm, the church doors burst open with a thunderous crash. Armed men in tactical gear swarmed inside, followed by deputies wearing corrupt Sheriff Briggs's uniforms. "Nobody move!" voices shouted as flashlight beams cut through the darkness. Ghost sprang into action, immediately taking down 2 attackers with precise strikes. His fists connected with jaws and ribs as he fought to protect his charges. But for every man he dropped, 2 more appeared. "Ghost!" Ruthie's terrified scream pierced the chaos as Isaiah was wrenched from her arms by a deputy. "Mommy!" Isaiah wailed, reaching desperately for his mother while being carried away. The maids' screams filled the sanctuary as rough hands dragged them from their sleeping bags. Eloria struggled fiercely, landing solid kicks on her captors until they subdued her. Mabel and Clarice clung to each other but were torn apart. Tasha prayed loudly, even as handcuffs clicked around her wrists. Pastor Evelyn rushed forward, her gray hair flying. "Stop this! This is God's house!" She tried to shield Janie from a deputy's grasp, but was violently shoved aside, crashing into a pew. Through the melee, Ghost caught sight of a familiar face that made his blood boil. Trigger Malone stood in the doorway, watching with a self-satisfied smirk. The betrayal hit Ghost like a physical blow. "Looking for this?" Trigger held up Eloria's apron with the hidden ledger. He handed it to Sheriff Briggs, who had just strode into the church. "Payment as agreed, Sheriff." Ghost roared with rage and fought harder, but the sheer number of attackers overwhelmed him. Fists and batons rained down until his vision blurred. A final blow to the back of his head sent him crashing to the floor. Through swimming vision, Ghost watched helplessly as the maids were forced outside, their cries growing distant. Isaiah's terrified face disappeared into the darkness. The sharp smell of gasoline filled the air as men splashed it across pews and walls. "Burn it," Sheriff Briggs ordered coldly. "Leave no evidence." Flames erupted around the sanctuary's edges. Smoke began filling the space as Ghost struggled to remain conscious. The heat grew intense as fire climbed the walls, consuming the peaceful haven that had sheltered them. Fighting against waves of dizziness, Ghost forced his battered body to move. He crawled through the thickening smoke, staying low as burning debris fell around him. The flames roared louder, drowning out all other sounds except the cracking of timber. Ghost's lungs burned as he inched toward a broken window. Outside, he glimpsed black vans speeding away into the night, taking everyone he had sworn to protect. With one final surge of effort, he pulled himself through the window just as the church's roof collapsed in a shower of sparks and flame. He stumbled away from the inferno, each step agony, until he reached the edge of the property. There he collapsed against a tree, watching as the beautiful old church burned to the ground. His failures pressed down on him like a physical weight. He had let them all down. Isaiah's frightened face and Ruthie's desperate screams echoed in his mind. As dawn's first light crept over the horizon, Ghost stood before the smoking ruins. His body was covered in cuts, burns, and bruises, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the fury and grief that shook his massive frame. He touched the cross hanging from his neck, Pastor Evelyn's parting gift the evening before. "I'm coming for them," he growled, his voice raw from smoke. "Every single one." His hands clenched into fists as he made his vow to the rising sun. He would find them. He would save them all, the maids, Isaiah, everyone. And God help anyone who stood in his way. The smoldering church stood as a testament to the evil men could do. But as Ghost limped away to begin his hunt, it also marked the spot where a hardened man's mission of protection had become an unshakable quest for redemption. No matter the cost, he would not fail them again. The rising sun cast long shadows across the country road as Ghost stumbled toward Buck's garage, each step sending waves of pain through his battered body. His leather jacket was scorched, his face streaked with soot and dried blood. The events of the night before played on endless repeat in his mind. The screams, the betrayal, the burning church. Buck was already working when Ghost pushed open the garage's side door. The older mechanic took one look at him and dropped his wrench with a clatter. "Good Lord, what happened to you?" Ghost collapsed onto a wooden stool, his legs finally giving out. "Trigger sold us out," he managed, his voice rough from smoke inhalation. "Sheriff's men took everyone." Jesus Christ. Buck hurried to his office and returned with a first aid kit. His weathered hands shook as he began cleaning Ghost's wounds. "The women? The little boy?" "All of them." Ghost winced as Buck dabbed antiseptic on a deep cut above his eye. "They burned down the church to cover their tracks." Buck's face darkened with anger. "Let me make some calls. You've got friends who haven't forgotten what you did for them." Over the next hour, as Buck treated Ghost's injuries, bikers began arriving at the garage. First came Marcus and Dale, brothers who Ghost had once saved from a Mexican cartel. Then Joshua, a former Marine who'd lost everything until Ghost gave him purpose. More followed, each one owing Ghost their life or freedom in some way. By mid-morning, 12 men had gathered, their bikes lined up outside like soldiers at attention. Ghost stood before them in the garage, his wounds bandaged but his eyes burning with determination. "Some of you know parts of this story," he began, his deep voice carrying to every corner. 7 innocent women were nearly lynched for discovering corruption. A 6-year-old boy was caught in the middle. I promised to protect them. His fist clenched. Last night I failed. He explained everything. The ledger, Trigger's betrayal, the attack at the church. The men listened in grim silence, their faces hardening with each detail. "These women," Ghost continued, "they saw something in me I stopped believing in years ago. They trusted me despite knowing what I am, what I've done. And that little boy..." His voice caught for a moment. "Isaiah looked at me like I was worth something." Marcus stepped forward, his scarred face set with determination. "What's the plan, Ghost?" Throughout the afternoon, they transformed Buck's garage into a war room. Maps were spread across workbenches as they studied the layout of Sheriff Briggs's territory. Joshua's marine contacts provided crucial intelligence. The Maids and Isaiah were being held in an abandoned textile factory 10 miles outside town. The sheriff used it for unofficial questioning of suspects who never made it to official booking. Buck worked tirelessly, tuning up bikes and checking weapons. The smell of gun oil mixed with motor oil as the rescue force prepared. Ghost moved between groups, planning entry points and escape routes, his tactical mind focused solely on the mission ahead. At 4 o'clock, Dale returned from surveillance of the factory. 2 guards at each entrance, maybe 15 inside. They're not expecting trouble, getting cocky. "They should be," Joshua growled, checking the action on his pistol. As the sun began to set, Ghost gathered his men one final time. They stood in a circle, their faces illuminated by the garage's fluorescent lights. These weren't just bikers anymore. They were warriors preparing for battle. "Those women believed I could be something better," Ghost said quietly, his words reaching each man. "They saw past what the world says we are. Tonight, we're going to give them a reason for that faith." The men nodded, their expressions resolute. They understood this wasn't just about rescue. It was about redemption. Buck approached Ghost as the others mounted up. The old mechanic pressed something into his hand, a silver cross on a chain. "Found it in the toolbox. Must have fallen off during treatment. Figured you'd want it back." Ghost clasped the cross Pastor Evelyn had given him, then tucked it inside his shirt. "Keep the lights on, Buck. We'll be bringing them home." The moon was rising as they rode out, 13 bikes moving in formation like dark angels. Their engines rumbled like approaching thunder, carrying Ghost and his warriors toward whatever fate awaited them at the factory. But this time, Ghost wasn't fighting alone. This time, he had men who understood that sometimes redemption comes at the point of a gun, and that even outlaws can serve justice. They rode into the gathering darkness, leaving Buck standing in his doorway, praying for their success. The rescue force disappeared around a bend, but the thunder of their engines echoed long after they were gone, a promise of retribution approaching on wings of steel and chrome. The moon hung like a silver coin in the ink-black sky as Ghost and his 12 riders approached the factory. Their engines were barely whispers now, carefully tuned to run silent. The abandoned textile mill loomed ahead, its broken windows reflecting moonlight like dead eyes. Ghost raised his fist, signaling a halt. The bikers killed their engines, letting momentum carry them into position behind a line of overgrown bushes. The factory's security lights cast harsh shadows across the cracked parking lot, where 2 guards paced with rifles slung across their backs. "Marcus, Dale, take out the power station," Ghost whispered. The brothers nodded and melted into the darkness. Joshua positioned his team along the perimeter, while Ghost studied the building through night vision binoculars. He could see movement inside, armed men patrolling catwalks, and in a corner, huddled shapes that had to be the Maids. 3 minutes passed in tense silence. Then the security lights flickered and died, plunging the compound into darkness. The guards shouted in confusion, reaching for flashlights. That's when Ghost gave the signal. The bikers surged forward like a wave of shadows. Ghost led the charge, his powerful frame moving with deadly purpose. The front gates burst open under the combined weight of 3 motorcycles. Before the guards could raise their weapons, Joshua's team had them disarmed and unconscious. "Main entrance now," Ghost commanded. They breached the factory doors with practiced precision, spreading out to secure the ground floor. Shouts and running footsteps echoed off steel beams above. The maids were being held in what used to be the main production floor. As Ghost's team engaged the guards, something unexpected happened. The women fought back. Mabel swung a metal chair into a deputy's knees. Clarice and Tasha worked together, pushing over shelving units to block pursuers. Even gentle Eloria showed fierce courage, grabbing a fire extinguisher and spraying it in a guard's face. "Ghost!" Ruthie's voice cut through the chaos. She was crouched in a corner, shielding Isaiah with her body as two men approached. Before Ghost could reach them, Eloria appeared behind the guards. "Hey!" she shouted, her voice surprisingly strong. "The ledger you're looking for? I memorized every name before you burned it." The guards turned, giving Ghost the opening he needed. He took them down with quick, efficient strikes. "You okay?" he asked Isaiah, who nodded bravely despite his tears. "The ledger's in the office safe," one of the guards groaned. "Combination's 28716. Ghost nodded to Joshua. "Get the women out. I'll handle this." The office was on the second floor. Ghost found the safe behind a cheap painting and spun the dial. Inside lay the leather-bound ledger, along with stacks of cash and documents. He was stuffing everything into a bag when a familiar voice spoke behind him. "Should have known you'd come playing hero." Ghost turned slowly. Trigger stood in the doorway, his face twisted with hate. "You betrayed your brothers," Ghost said quietly. "Brothers?" Trigger spat. "You've gone soft, Ghost. Risking everything for some maids and a kid? That's not what we are." "No," Ghost agreed. "It's what we should be." Trigger charged with a roar. The fight was brutal and personal, years of tension exploding in fists and fury. They crashed through office furniture, neither man holding back. Trigger fought dirty, trying to gouge eyes and strike vital points. But Ghost had something Trigger didn't, a reason beyond hatred. The fight ended when Ghost slammed Trigger into the wall, cracking plaster. "It's over," Ghost growled. But Trigger wasn't finished. He pulled a knife, slashing wildly. Ghost caught his wrist and twisted until bones cracked. Trigger howled and stumbled backward, then turned and ran, disappearing into the darkness. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. Ghost grabbed the ledger and hurried downstairs, where Joshua waited with news. "Cole Harrington came through," Joshua said. "Called in federal agents. State police are on their way. The good ones, not Briggs's people." Ghost found Isaiah where the boy had been hiding behind some crates. The child's eyes lit up when he saw him. "I knew you'd come," Isaiah whispered, as Ghost lifted him into his arms. The maids gathered around, supporting each other. They were bruised and shaken, but their spirits were unbroken. Janie had a cut on her forehead. Lila limped slightly, but they stood tall, dignity intact. "Let's go home," Ghost said softly. They emerged from the warehouse just as red and blue lights began painting the night. Ghost carried Isaiah, the boy's arms wrapped trustingly around his neck. The maids followed, walking proud despite their ordeal. Behind them, the old factory stood silent, its dark windows now witnessing a different kind of justice than its corrupt owners had intended. As dawn broke over the horizon, casting long shadows across the factory parking lot, Ghost stood quietly beside his motorcycle. The leather-bound ledger felt heavy in his hands, not just from its physical weight, but from the years of corruption and pain documented within its pages. Federal agents in dark suits approached, their badges gleaming in the early morning light. "This contains everything," Ghost said, passing over the ledger. "Names, dates, amounts, the whole corrupt system." The lead agent, a stern-faced woman, nodded gravely. "We'll start making arrests immediately. The evidence here is overwhelming." Within hours, news helicopters circled overhead as local stations broke the story. Television reporters stood before cameras, describing years of systematic corruption involving the sheriff, deputies, and prominent businessmen. The poison accusations against the maids were exposed as a desperate frame job to cover up the stolen ledger. In a quiet corner of the temporary command center, the 7 maids finally had a chance to properly reunite. Tears flowed freely as they held each other, their relief and joy palpable. "I thought I'd never see you all again," Mabel sobbed, squeezing Clarice's hand. "The Lord watched over us," Janie said softly, "and he sent us an unlikely angel in leather." Tasha laughed through her tears. "A guardian angel with tattoos and a motorcycle." Their moment of peace was interrupted by the arrival of a black SUV. Cole Harrington stepped out, looking disheveled and humbled. His expensive suit was wrinkled, his eyes red from lack of sleep. He approached Ruthie hesitantly, stopping a few feet away. "I'm so sorry," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I've been a coward for years, hiding from the truth, hiding from my responsibilities. To you and to Isaiah." Ruthie watched him carefully, one hand protectively on Isaiah's shoulder. "Why now?" "Because seeing you almost die made me realize what really matters. I can't change the past, but I want to make things right. If you'll let me." Isaiah looked up at his mother, then at Cole. "Are you really my daddy?" Cole knelt down to the boy's level. "Yes, I am. And I've wasted too much time not being there for you." Isaiah broke free from Ruthie's grip and ran into Cole's arms. The businessman's composure cracked completely as he held his son for the first time, tears streaming down his face. From his position near the motorcycles, Ghost observed the scene silently. His body ached from the fight, but something else ached deeper, a feeling he couldn't quite name. Pride? Peace? Whatever it was, it felt right. The federal agents worked efficiently throughout the morning. By early afternoon, they had organized protection details and support services for each of the maids. Job opportunities were arranged through witness protection programs, ensuring their safety and financial security. "We have positions available across several states," the lead agent explained. "New identities, fresh starts. You'll be well taken care of." A familiar voice called out across the parking lot. "There's my warrior for justice!" Pastor Evelyn approached slowly, her arm in a cast, but her smile radiant as ever. Ghost moved to help her, but she waved him off. "It's just a fracture, child. Small price to pay for standing up to evil." She reached up with her good arm and pulled Ghost's head down, placing a gentle kiss on his forehead. "The Lord works in mysterious ways, doesn't he? Using a rough-and-tumble biker to save his children." Ghost shifted uncomfortably. "I'm no savior, Pastor." "No, you're something better. You're a man who chose to do right when it mattered most." She squeezed his arm. "Don't discount the miracles that happen through ordinary people who show extraordinary courage." By late afternoon, Cole's company had arranged temporary housing for everyone at a secure hotel complex. Police escorts led the way as the maids were transported in comfortable SUVs. Isaiah waved goodbye to Ghost from the backseat window, his other hand holding tight to his mother's. Pastor Evelyn watched the convoy pull away. "You know, sometimes God's greatest blessings come disguised as challenges. Those women needed a protector. You needed a purpose. Look how perfectly that worked out." Ghost mounted his motorcycle, the engine rumbling to life. The morning sun had grown strong, warming his face and chasing away the last shadows of night. 7 days had passed since the dramatic rescue at the factory. The afternoon sun streamed through tall windows of the community housing complex, casting warm light across freshly painted walls and newly arranged furniture. The scent of home cooking filled every corner: fried chicken sizzling in cast-iron skillets, collard greens simmering with ham hocks, and buttery biscuits turning golden in the oven. The kitchen buzzed with activity as the 7 maids worked together, moving with the familiar rhythm of women who had cooked side by side for years. Clarice hummed an old gospel tune while she seasoned the chicken. Mabel and Janie took turns checking the biscuits, while Tasha and Lila stirred the greens. Eloria arranged flowers in mason jars, and Ruthie set the long wooden table with mismatched plates that somehow looked perfect together. Isaiah bounced excitedly by the window, his face pressed against the glass. "They're here! The motorcycles are here!" The rumble of engines filled the parking lot as Ghost and his loyal riders pulled up. The men who had risked everything to help save the women dismounted their bikes, looking almost shy as they approached the building's entrance. Ghost led them, carrying a wrapped package that Isaiah had specifically requested he bring. A new teddy bear to replace the one lost during their ordeal. The moment Ghost stepped through the door, Isaiah ran straight for him. "You came! You really came!" Ghost's weathered face softened as he handed the package to the boy. "Wouldn't miss it for anything, little man." Isaiah grabbed Ghost's hand, tugging him toward the dining room. "You have to sit here," he insisted, pointing to the head of the table. "Mama says it's the special place." Ghost hesitated, but Ruthie nodded encouragingly. Isaiah's right. That's your seat today. The other bikers filed in, filling the room with their presence. These hardened men who had fought so fiercely now stood awkwardly, unsure of their place in this warm domestic scene. But the maids welcomed them naturally, directing them to seats and filling water glasses. "Lord have mercy, when was the last time you boys had a proper meal?" Mabel asked, bringing out a steaming platter of chicken. "Can't remember," one of the bikers admitted with a grin. "Been living on gas station coffee and beef jerky too long." The food kept coming. Platters of golden chicken, bowls of perfectly seasoned greens, baskets of hot biscuits, pitchers of sweet tea. The table groaned under the weight of this feast prepared with gratitude and love. Once everyone was seated, Eloria stood, her quiet presence drawing all eyes. "Before we eat, we want to say something." She looked directly at Ghost. "You saved our lives, not just from the rope, but from despair. You showed us that God's help can come from unexpected places." Clarice wiped tears from her eyes. "When those men were going to kill us, I prayed for deliverance. Never thought it would come in leather and chrome." "You protected my son," Ruthie added softly, her hand on Isaiah's shoulder. "You kept him safe when his whole world was falling apart. There's no way to repay that kind of debt." Ghost shifted uncomfortably in his chair, unused to such praise. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. The emotion was too raw, too overwhelming. "Join hands, everyone," Eloria instructed. "We'll say grace." Rough, calloused hands clasped smooth ones, bikers and maids united in an unlikely family circle. Isaiah slipped his small hand into Ghost's larger one, beaming up at him. Eloria's voice filled the room with gentle authority. "Lord, we thank you for this food, for our safety, and for bringing us together. And Lord, we especially thank you for showing us that some angels don't have wings. Some ride motorcycles." Ghost bowed his head, trying to hide the tears that slipped down his cheeks. But these women had seen him at his strongest and his most vulnerable. They knew his heart now. Around the table, conversations bloomed. Stories were shared, laughter rang out, and second helpings were passed. Ghost watched it all, feeling something he hadn't experienced in decades: belonging. Here, among these brave women and this precious child, alongside his loyal brothers, he had found more than redemption. He had found family. The afternoon light softened to evening gold, but no one moved to leave. They sat together, these unlikely companions, bound by shared courage and newfound trust. Ghost felt Isaiah lean against his arm, sleepy and content. The boy's simple acceptance, like the maid's forgiveness, had helped heal something broken inside him. In this moment, surrounded by warmth and gratitude, Ghost understood that his life's purpose had shifted. No more living in shadows, ruled by fear and violence. This was his new beginning, built on protection, not intimidation, on love, not fear, on the kind of redemption that comes from choosing to do right, no matter the cost. Thank you for listening. Stories connect us in the most unexpected ways. If you felt that spark today, make sure you're subscribed. I share a new one daily, and the next might change your day.